Today I'm going to show you how to build an advanced performance effect for the Octatrack I like to call EZDrummer. Let me quickly give you an example of what this effect sounds like, and then we'll go through the nitty-gritty of actually building it on the Octatrack from scratch. Now we're starting out with an empty project. We're going to do this completely from scratch and build the EZDrummer effect. First thing that we need to do is adjust our pattern scaling. So function pattern, change it to per track mode, function page, 1, 2, 3, make it 64 steps. Move the arrows so that it's underlying where the master is, function 1, 2, 3, and now this is 64 steps as well. Let's go to track 2 and make sure this is also set at 4 bars long. Now we're going to be using a through track and a neighbor track. So let's go back to track 1, double press source, and select a through track, go into our step editor, and put down a trigger on step 1 so that the through track functions at the beginning of our pattern and stays on. You could also hold this track down and hit play and that would work, but that's not a good way to make a through track function, because every time you double press stop, it'll stop functioning. That's all we need to do for our through track right now. Now we have both the tracks that we need. Let's bring them up to unity gain. So I'm going to go to track 1, bring the track level up, track 2, and bring the track level up to 127. And now both those tracks have the same volume. Track level is just a mix of your audio and it doesn't actually boost any audio. It's just an attenuator. Now we're going to be able to hear the audio at the same volume as if we plugged our headphones directly into the Digitact or the Syntac. I'm going to hold function and press MIDI and make sure that my Octatrack is sending or receiving clock. For me today, I'm actually going to use the Octatrack to send clock to these devices. So I'm going to say transport send, clock send, and then we can leave this menu. Now let's go ahead and test our wires and audio and make sure that everything sounds all right. Everything sounds good. Everything is at unity. It's exactly as I expected it to sound. Now let's get started with the effect. We're going to go to Effects 2, and all the effects that we're going to use are the default effects on your track, so we don't actually have to select any different effects, but we do have to make some alterations to the effects. I'm going to go into Effects 2 because this is where our delay lives. Double press Effects 2 to go into the secondary menu. I'm going to turn tape off because the tape delay isn't great for this effect. We can turn the ping pong on or off. This is going to be up to you. Both of them sound good and it has the same effect either way. And then lastly, we're going to turn lock on because this is how you create the beat repeat effect. Essentially what this effect is the beat repeat effect going into a filter, going into a dotted eighth note delay with no feedback, with an LFO on the filter frequency, opening the filter up across 4 bars, and the whole combination creates the drum fill effect that you heard at the beginning of the video. So now that we have our settings for the secondary menu set up for the beat repeat effect, let's go ahead and start adjusting the scene. I'm going to bring the feedback up to 127 so the effect lasts as long as we need it to. And then I'm going to bring the send up to 127. We're actually going to lock the send at 0. The reason why we're going to lock the send at 0 is because the beat repeat effect doesn't engage until send is at 0. And the reason why we chose 127 is if you think of this as 0 and this as 127, in this case it would be inverted. This is 127 and this is 0. This is the beginning of the effect. I don't want the effect to engage until I hit the end of the crossfade. That way I have some room to play with maybe some of the filter that I'll be using. I can filter it and then bam, engage the effect if I want. It's easier for timing things, just makes more sense. I prefer it to feel like I'm clicking it into effect. I also like to mute scene A instead of having both the scenes active. That way I can just think of this as a dry wet mix. That's why that's muted right now. At this point, we have a beat repeat that we've created as a scene. Next, I'm going to change my time to 32 because that's what sounds good for this particular effect. Currently, it's more of an echo freeze. And it does a really good echo freeze if we adjust this width quite a bit. If you adjust the time to 16, it does an even better echo freeze in my opinion. But we're not going to be building an echo freeze. So let's bring it back up. Now that we have our freeze effect completed, we need to move on to the next part of the tutorial, which happens on track 2. We're going to turn this into a neighbor track. Double press source, select neighbor track. Now we're going to use a filter and we're going to use another delay. So let's set our filter up. The way we want our filter to be is that it's going to be locked in at 20, 30, 20. And this creates just a really nice low-pass filter sound. You can hear it doing its thing. You can also hear that I can filter and then it beat repeats. You can just kind of barely hear it. You'll be able to hear it a lot better soon. So now let's go over to our delay, and most of these values are going to stay the same. We're going to lock in the send at 127 and leave the feedback at 0. I know that might seem strange, but feedback 0 just means that the delay will repeat one time, and that's what we want. We want one extra beat post the beat repeat effect so that it creates kind of a drumming rhythm effect. But you can hear that dotted eighth note, so it added a little bit more to our rhythm. If I open up the filter, it's a bit more obvious. Just a little bit more rhythm. Now, it doesn't sound how we want it yet because we haven't adjusted our LFO. So now let's go over to the LFO, and we're using the LFO on the neighbor track. Double press LFO, and here we're going to change LFO 1. That's the only LFO we have to use. You can get more tricky and more interesting using more LFOs and doing more modulation, and I do recommend that you do that. But first, to get the effect working the original way that I did in the Octatrack performance templates, and the target that we're going to select is filter width. Change the wave to a upwards ramp, leave the multiplier at 1x, and this is where things get a little interesting. We do need to use a different kind of TRIG LFO. We don't want a free running LFO. We want it to start this ramp at the beginning of our sequence and go for exactly 4 bars. Or if we want for exactly 8 bars, you just have to change some of the track scaling and some of the speeds of the LFO. But it's very simple and easy to do. So the trig that we want to use would be just trig. And to have this trig one would work, we would just put down a trigger at the beginning of our neighbor track, and this would tell the LFO to reset its phase at the beginning of our pattern. And if we have the timing set up right, it'll work for exactly 4 bars and then reset at the beginning of the pattern. Now we could also hold down function and put down a green trigger, hold that trigger and hit no, and this will work as well. This is a trigless trig. This will also trigger the reset phase of our LFO. We could also use this sync trig. What sync trig does is it uses the beginning of your pattern to reset the phase of the LFO. So we don't need any triggers on the sequence at all. We just set it to sync trig. Let's just go ahead and leave it at sync trig because it would be less work had I not had to explain it earlier. So now that we have that done, we can change the speed to 16, which is the speed we want. Will give us exactly 4 bars at the 1x multiplier with this ramp. And we've already assigned it to the filter width. We're ready to go. Let's just go ahead and set the depth to about 75, and that's it. Now let's have a listen to our effect. If you just let it keep going, you can hear it reset. It just keeps starting over and over. If you don't like the little extra beat that happens at the end, you can bring the volume down and then lock your scene's volume at 127, and it sounds like this. Just a little bit cleaner when you do it that way. So that's it. That's how you build the Easy Drummer effect. I do recommend that you separate your melody and your drum sources and build this effect separately on 2 different through tracks and 2 different neighbor tracks so that you can have them going at different timings. You could have one that's doing a dotted eighth note over here with the speed set at 32 and another one that's doing half notes with the dotted eighth note. And you'll just get a much more dynamic sound that way. Experiment with having another effect before it goes into the beat repeat effect so that it freezes. It may be chorused or distorted. There's a lot of different variations that you can come up with. If you enjoy these kind of tutorials or want to get your hands on my performance templates, you can visit patreon.com/EZBOT. That's how you can support this channel. You can also visit coffee.com/EZBOT and buy my performance templates if you'd like. Otherwise, I'll see you next time. I'm Matthew, aka EZBOT. Later.